Welcome to a Fresh Perspective podcast, catering to the latest in ingredient trends, consumer insights, and food news. Brought to you by Corbion.
Welcome to a Fresh Perspective podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about everything food. I'm Jenni Kulzer, your host, and I'm here with two incredible guests. Jennifer Halliburton of Corbion Global Insights is right here to my left, and then to her left is Shawn Simpson with Bimbo Bakeries. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Today we're going to talk with my guests about global trends that are coming out of the pandemic, how those trends are driving consumer behaviors, and where we might find some new opportunities across bakery. And don't forget, we are live right now at ASB at the BakingTECH in Chicago. So this is really exciting. We don't usually do this in front of a live audience, so I'm kind of pumped, and I think we're all a little bit pumped, and so here we go. You ready?
Ready.
Let's do it.
All right. So we're going to start with Jennifer Halliburton here. She is incredible with insights. I work with her all the time at Corbion. Jen, what are some of the key consumer trends we're seeing coming out of the pandemic?
Well, I guess I would start with something I heard in one of the breakouts yesterday, one of the consumer breakouts, that I found really interesting. When we talk about, if you think about you guys were affected by the pandemic, right? Who wasn't affected? If you had to boil it down to one word, control. So somebody said the word control, and I'm like, wow, that just describes so many of the things that we felt. I know I felt. It's like that loss of control that occurred when we were in the height of the pandemic, and supply chain control. Like all the challenges that we felt were really around our loss of control. So the trends that we're seeing right now coming out of the pandemic really are consumers trying to get some of that control back. And we're seeing it in ways of yearning around or awareness around health and wellness. We're also seeing it around consumers looking for eating experiences. So it's not just eating to feed my body, it's eating for the experience. So if you think about ways to make life more exciting, food can help do that.
Right.
And then one of the other things that I think we're all dramatically affected by is inflation. And so consumers are really looking for value add or added value in any of the products that they buy. So we see that across the board.
And what kind of value add? Can you give us an example of what that might mean?
So when we talk about value add, that could be a number of different things. But in bakery, if you want to make it explain it in tangible words, if you think claims, right? If you can make a claim that helps a consumer realize or recognize that your product offers more value than something sitting next to it that doesn't make any claim, right? So claims coming out of the pandemic that we see that are still really strong are in bakery: whole grain, whole wheat, fiber, protein. We see claims around natural and clean label being big emphasis too. So we had a little talk before this podcast. I'm sure you guys are surprised about that. But Shawn, you had mentioned in an earlier talk about some even deeper claims that you guys have been working on. One being regenerative flour. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, that's a practice that's really starting to come up through the industry. We actually have just implemented in the last few weeks in our Phoenix bakery 10% of a new blend within our flour. It's regenerative, so that's really exciting. And what we're trying to do within Grupo, and I'm sure in other organizations, we want to protect our soil and our farmers. And so what we're doing is we're looking at practices that we can not only have a healthy wheat crop, but also ensure that we have good soil for future generations. So it's just getting started right now, and we're in the beginning stages, but it's very exciting.
So this is a sustainability kind of a claim then, right? We are basically leaving the soil healthy enough to grow more things.
Yeah, the way I was always told from a high-level perspective is if you want sustainable agriculture, you're leaving it in the same position that you found it, and regenerative, you're trying to heal the soil, put it in a better position than where you started. So that's how it's been explained to me, and I think we can do our part with that.
I think that's amazing. I don't know. I grew up on a farm, and we had to rotate crops and worry about where we were putting things year after year because of that. So that's an interesting claim, and yeah.
And we're seeing, like in the research, when we actually analyze which claims are growing or which claims seem to be improving or performance of those products are doing really well. Products with newer claims that have a faster growth rate, really, we see a lot of things that are tied more to that whole sustainability. So it is things, consumers care about where their products come from. They want to know that they're being responsibly made, responsibly sourced. And what we find is consumers will align with those products and stay more loyal to those products over time. And those products are typically able to generate a much higher price premium than their counterparts.
Yeah. And transparency, as we've seen now, it feels like ages, but it's really been since the pandemic, that transparency in food is just so incredibly important now. I mean, I think it always was, but.
One thing I'd add is we're starting to implement more PVIP wheat, which is preferred variety, identity preserved. So it's a collaboration with our millers, with the Wheat Quality Council, with our farmers and producers to look, and with the schools like K-State and Texas A&M, to look at crops that are both beneficial to the farmer and the producer. It's also beneficial to baking. So it's very important that we have high quality flour for our baking process.
Awesome. Thank you.
There's some opportunities there as well.
Yeah. So tell me about some new products. Like, are we talking about, some of the product introductions that kind of come out of the pandemic with these kinds of themes attached?
Yeah, so when we analyze products with claims, which are the things that are really helping add value, we see claims that are more established. So things like whole grain, whole wheat, more fiber. Those claims still are very relevant and continue to grow. We're seeing other claims that are products that are probably a little more mature, but where we're seeing a lot of new growth is, as I mentioned, sustainability. We're seeing a lot of new growth in claims like keto, carb conscious, protein. One of the other things that we're seeing is this claim around traditional, which seems weird, right? We're all looking for the next new thing, but ultimately our consumers might be looking for old world style, artisan processes that are established and tried and true, and there's a wholesomeness in all of that. And so we're seeing some of those trends really kind of push a lot of acceleration.
Yeah, we are. And I think we've been hearing this for a little bit of time now, right? Like, this has actually been around for...
Right. And we've seen a lot of new product introductions from the health and wellness that are trying to appeal to consumers from a perspective of how can I give you something a little more of what you need, right? Not necessarily bakery food as medicine, but bakery, how can I give you a little bit more so that you feel better about this product than maybe something else that's sitting on the shelf?
Yeah. Shawn, what are some of the learnings? Oh, I'm sorry.
I
just interrupted you. You go ahead first.
No, I was anticipating your question.
Oh, okay. You go ahead then.
No, we've had within that perspective, we've actually launched a few items during the pandemic. One is keto buns. We've also launched keto bread as well, and then we have a Sara Lee white bread made with veggies. So a couple of interesting different projects that we've had. Keto is interesting from a baking perspective because just the fact that it's different than the normal flour-based products that we produce. I always like to add a little bit of color commentary. One of my technical service associates is in the audience here, and I may find it funny. He may not find it funny because he actually had to do it. But I remember getting a call from him saying we went to run our tests, and the mixer would not accept it because the way the algorithm worked, you had to have flour. So when you put 0 in for flour, the mixer wouldn't even take it. So we've had to, those little things that when you do something completely different and you think you've mapped everything out. With keto, the process and the temperatures and the formulation's different, but it was really a big challenge, but the customer really wants it. So that's good. And also from a perspective of sometimes we have to look back and say, what does the customer value? And sometimes we're our own worst critics. So for example, I want that keto bun to look just like a beautiful ballpark bun, and it's a little bit different. So we're trying to work through continuous improvement to make it a better and better product. But it's a completely different experience. So it's been an interesting rollout. I also mentioned the Sara Lee white bread made with veggies. We launched that in October. And it's a white bread with about a full cup worth of vegetables in there. And it rolled out pretty well. One interesting story with that is when we first started testing, we had a lot of inconsistency in the color of the crumb because the carrot sourcing. So that's one of those things where we had to look at, working with the supplier to say, okay, well, it tastes good, but the customer expects the same color every time, right? So it's meant there to be healthy. A final thing with that I thought that was interesting from a marketing perspective is when we first were working with marketing, they were looking at calling it hidden veggies, thinking back to, trying to, trick your children into eating more vegetables. But the consumer actually was like, no, don't put hidden, put it loud and clear that this is a healthier option, that this has vegetables in it. And so we changed the name behind that. So I think that kind of goes with the trend of what the customer wants to see and deliver from that perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I'd like to just think about trying to feed my children orange bread and just see what they would do.
Well, it does not. It is not orange bread any longer. So.
Well, that's good. So, Jen, you were talking about value inflation. Can you tell me a little bit about, how do we help consumers address the inflation? How can bakers provide value add as within their products?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things that we have found in the research is that claims do add value, and they have to be relevant, obviously, right? You can't just slap something on a package and expect it to make it sell better. It has to be a relevant claim that speaks to a consumer need state. And what's interesting is when we look at products that have claims on them versus their competitors that don't have any real claims, those products are growing on average at least 8 times faster. 8 times faster. And the ones without claims tend to be flat to declining. So if you're not addressing the consumer in some way, speaking to them, and it's really, it's a message. It's around messaging that allows you to speak to them on some point that they're interested in. And it's important. It's really important from an inflation perspective because we all know that we're under price pressures. As a consumer, I'm under price pressure. I'm looking for a product that will give me more at a price that I think is reasonable, right? When we look at price points from a products that carry claims perspective, it does matter. Prices, claims, products with claims, if I can say this right, products with claims carry typically a 50-cent per unit price premium average across total bakery. And it changes when you look at different product types. So let's take morning bakery, for instance, so breakfast products. We see the opportunity to stack claims, so more than one claim at a time. So you might have a health and wellness claim. You might have something that appeals more towards the premium or indulgence perspective that gives consumers, oh, wow, I'm getting more for my buck. Within the morning bakery space, we see price premiums at like 80 cents a unit, higher at a premium versus the rest of the products. So it does make a difference, and it goes back to that point that it needs to be relevant, and that's where you find what is the consumer need state that makes them look at this product or this category, and how do you appeal to them differently than maybe competition is appealing.
Yeah. I can see that. I mean, that makes sense. And I think that that's a really important place to go when it comes to value add.
Yeah.
So I'm skipping around a little bit, Shawn, but I do want to go back and ask you, within reason, can you let us know what types of learnings came out of the pandemic for Bimbo?
Oh, excellent question. So obviously how we work, a lot of people were working from home. There's probably a lot of parallel paths with other companies. So how much time do we need to spend traveling? We're a very travel-focused company. But one of the biggest ones is ingredient disruptions. So the fact that we had multiple supply chain instances, we're such a large organization that, and the amount of the sheer amount of volume of ingredients that we use is staggering. So there was times where we would have a blip with Vital Wheat gluten, or maybe a dough conditioner is not available. We have to make an adjustment. And really what I'm impressed with is the fact that we never had to shut a bakery down. The bakery teams and our suppliers and our vendor partners all stepped in, and we made it happen. So that was a big piece. Yeah. And I'm sure during shows like this, talent retention is very important. We have a high, like most industries, the whole baking industry has a high turnover rate. So how do we identify and nurture our bench? So that's a big one. How do we engage our associates from that perspective? And I'd say those are some of the really big learnings that we have. But we were still able to, through that whole time frame, keep the eye on innovation and launch new products. But I guarantee you, the plant managers did not like to get a supply disruption notice. We need to do a 180-degree turn here and make it happen. But they were very successful with it, and I was very proud of that.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think probably maybe every person, maybe even in this room, had to deal with some of those things, and I think it shows a lot of sheer will that we're all still here and we're all still doing our thing, right? One final question, and this is to both and either and all. Are there any guidelines that either of you would have for introducing successful new products?
Do you want to jump in first?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. I think from an insights perspective, the things that we see that help products be really successful or are where you recognize there's a trend coming out of a consumer need state, right? So pandemic caused increased awareness for health and wellness, and gut health means whole health. That all of those things, right? That's going to drive me as a consumer to pick differently. So as an innovator, it's around how do I find the right intersection of a product that I might have that could help meet those needs, so that you can really address the consumer need state, but most importantly, make sure you're communicating to the consumer that you have benefits that address those needs, right? Whether it's an on-pack claim or through your marketing messaging, but it's really important to make sure that they understand, what is it that you're doing, why is it important, and why should you be interested?
From the bakery commercialization standpoint, with Bimbo, we're so large that it becomes a logistical effort. So once marketing and R&D define what the product is that we want to establish, we have to look at all the logistics. What part of the country are we going to be serving? Are we serving everywhere? Or is it a specific market? Mm-hmm. Is there particular equipment that comes into play? There's long lead times on equipment. Are we able, and how do we organize testing, whether you need to order new pans, things like that. So it becomes, for us, it also becomes a planning segment and doing good functional testing. So it's one thing, a lot of what I work at is scaling up from what we test in our R&D center and innovation center, and then how we actually execute in the bakery. So what I would say from our end is it's a matter of a cross collaboration with our R&D marketing teams, and then trying to figure out where it best fits within our whole network of bakeries.
What a wonderful place to stop. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Jennifer and Shawn, and I'm Jenny. Feel free to come up and talk to us now that we're done. Feel free to find us at the Fresh Perspective podcast. You can find us on Apple, Stitcher, YouTube, all the places. We have been live here at ASB today in Chicago, which has been very fun. And don't forget to preserve what matters. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to a Fresh Perspective podcast, brought to you by Corbion. Until next time, preserve what matters.